Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brine Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Wednesday, February the 26th. I'm your host, Brine Hamilton. And today we have a bit of a longer cast, so I'm going to jump right into the announcements, and I'm going to move through them very quickly. First announcement is for the IAHSS Annual Conference and Exhibition. This is taking place May 4th to May 6th in Phoenix, Arizona. For more information, follow the link in the description. There's still opportunities for sponsorship and, of course, for registration as well. If you'll be in the Toronto area on March 11th, the IAHSS Ontario chapter is hosting an educational event. We have a great agenda planned for the day, and this event is free of charge. All you have to do is register, and the link is also in the description. The IAHSS Boston chapter will be hosting a joint event with As Is on March 12th, and on March 13th, they'll be hosting their breakfast meeting. For more information, you can contact Brendan Riley or go to the events page on ihss.org. And finally, if you'll be in the Toronto area on July 13th, the IAHSS Ontario chapter will also be hosting their annual Golf Classic. This event in the last 6 years has contributed $110,000 to cancer research through the Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation. If you have a healthcare security related event or a significant announcement that you would like me to mention on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me on social media. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or Facebook. My name is Brine, B-R-I-N-E Hamilton. You can also connect with me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram with the username @BrineHamilton. Also, feel free to join the Healthcare Security Cast LinkedIn group. We have some exclusive content in there and a special offer for our 10th episode, which is happening next week. We also have a Facebook page as well. And now for today's show, we're joined by Allison Graham. Allison is an author and professional speaker. Her focus is everyday resilience. And I'll say this is one of the most fun interviews that I've done so far. So I hope you enjoy the show. And now we'll jump right into the content. Thank you for joining us today, Allison.
Awesome to be with you. I'm excited about our chat.
So am I. All right, well, let's get started by talking about you. Who is Allison Graham, and can you share your story with us?
Oh, so you don't start with the small questions?
No,
you
not
go
at
with
all.
The whole big one.
We go right in. That's how we do it on the Healthcare Security Cast.
That's awesome. So my passion is really about how do you help people deal with obstacles better. And the reason that I came to this work is because I went through what I call my decade of hell. And I think so many people can relate to times in their life where they feel like the punches just won't stop. And for me, it started with first my dad dying, then my grandma dying, which was a very normal part of life, except I didn't have the tools to manage the day-to-day stress, which was a magnifying glass for how badly I was managing my actual life then when adversity hit. Went on, had a surgery, caused some neuropathic damage, which caused some pain, had another 5 surgeries in and out of the hospital. Probably saw many of your listeners, the hospital security teams, right? And although not because I was ever in trouble, for the record. I think I should say that
Fair
now.
enough.
And it just went, and then a bunch more people died in a very short period of time. And anyone who's ever gone through tough times knows that you still have to show up to work and perform at your best, even though you feel like behind the scenes your world is crumbling. And that was really what started my passion for doing this work, because a lot of the advice I got on resiliency actually either A, didn't work, or B, frustrated me more than it helped. And so when I figured out what actually helps me perform better, despite obstacles, despite adversity, despite stress, I was like, wow. And my friends would ask me for advice and I'd end up telling them and they'd be like, that's a really good idea. And then I thought I'd like formalize and start writing about it and sharing and speaking at conferences about resilience.
Awesome. Now, can you give me your definition of resilience?
It's a very expanded definition of resilience. It's really about insulating yourself from the negative impact that obstacles have in your life. And it's not so much how do you react, how do we problem solve? It's actually a lot of my work is about doing it on the front end to reinterpreting. I think that's maybe the wrong word, but trying to figure out how do we not get stressed out about this because it's not really an issue. And then how do we allow ourselves to truly feel the things that are issues? So many times in life, what we do is we glorify stress. So we'll say, how are you? Oh my gosh, I'm so busy. As if that's like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
And yet you go through a divorce, someone you love dies, you've, consistently unhappy at your job. Or maybe you've been off on stress leave or you've had an injury or something's gone on. And then people say, how are you? Somebody you care about. And you're like, oh, I'm fine. Well, actually, no, you're not fine. You've just gone through something significant. And I'm hoping to flip that. I want people to be okay with feeling the emotions that come from the significance.
Okay, gotcha. Now, would you say there's a difference between how you would handle, well, I guess not how you would handle, but resiliency both in the workplace and your home life, so personal and professional resilience?
Well, I think the skill set is the same. It begins with self-awareness, because if you don't have self-awareness, you just go through life reacting to and repeating patterns of how you've reacted to other situations without actually understanding that maybe there's a better way. And like we can dive into all this, but it's situational awareness, like what's actually happening. Is this a stressor? Is it an obstacle? Or is it an adversity? Because I think when we say resilience, people think that it's the same tools to deal with an adversity as it is obstacle, but it's totally not. They're totally different situations, except the fundamental situational awareness. What is it? What's within my control? What's without of my control? And then the self-awareness. What stories am I telling about this? What state am I in physically to make the best decision about this? Like, am I at risk? Like, for example, I got up at 4:00 this morning. I was, and I've done that the last 3 days. It's late at night when we're getting to do this, and I'm exhausted. So before we came in, I knew I made that conscious self-awareness check-in. How am I right now going into this? And I was like, you know what? I'm tired. My pain is high, and bringing awareness to that. And then doing a little dance party before I came, into seeing you and putting on some good music allowed me to raise my energy so that I could still give the best I possibly can, despite the fact that that is there. But without that self-awareness, do we make a better decision when we're tired? Of course. Or no, we don't. Of course not. Right? Do we make a better decision when we're in pain? No. So we've got to be aware of that, because sometimes people will just get, they're emotionally charged. Maybe they're scared. And, I was in and out of the hospital so often, and I saw this all the time. People who are maybe scared for their lives. They're going through something, step aside and park the issue of like real mental illness. Just a healthy person going in and they're getting a diagnosis, they're scared. And most people are scared to admit that they're scared. And they're completely unaware of what's happening. They're exhausted. Maybe they are in pain. Maybe they're just went through a test and they've had something. And then somebody doesn't hold the elevator for them and they snap. Or they're talking to the parking person and their credit card's not working and they turn into a raving lunatic, like you've seen this happen, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like we all have. And that's because they're not checking in and they're not self-aware of what's really happening in their world. And so they're reacting instead of being resilient and processing the situation effectively.
Now, you touched on a couple things there, and just thinking in terms of self-awareness, I think most people feel like they are self-aware, and most of us probably aren't. Do you have any?
Yeah. So the irony is, how do you know if you're self-aware? If you're asking the question, you're more self-aware than the average person, because most people would never ask the question, am I self-aware enough? So I believe it's about curiosity. Do you follow Gary Vaynerchuk a lot?
I do.
Okay, so I'm a huge fan, and I just think he's got a lot of really great wisdom. And he talks a lot about self-awareness being a key. And Tom Bilyeu is another one who I love watching Impact Theory and just wisdom, right? And he talks about it. He's like, how do you get somebody to be self-aware? And I believe the answer is curiosity. And so if you're not consistently asking questions of yourself, then you're not self-aware enough. And even when you start asking those questions, that's when you're going to realize how unself-aware you actually are, and you're going to continue to ask the questions. So instead of judging ourselves, like, oh, I reacted poorly in that situation, or why, ask why. Oh, that's interesting. Wonder what that did. Was I not feeling great? Was there something going on in my personal life so I showed up differently in this situation? I was already at the top of my capacity level of intensity for the day. Asking those questions. When we're a kid, you've got 4 of them. You know what it's like, right? There are, question, why? And then we grow up because we're taught early, stop asking questions. You're annoying me. Those questions are how we learn. Those questions are how we grow. And while I don't think it's recommended that grown adults go around, asking everybody why, I want to encourage people to get a hint of that growth curiosity back for their life as an adult. And I think the only way you can do it is questions. And so one of the things that I have is a 10 rapid fire questions that you can ask yourself in any situation to help you be the most resilient responder to that situation as possible. And I'm happy to share that with you as a download.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
I would give for your listeners.
I appreciate that, because I know I know this is a business for you as well, so I don't want to ask for too much for free.
I will put it up online for free. I won't even ask them for an email to have it.
Awesome.
I think because it's so important. If we could get people just even choosing 1 or 2 of the questions on the list is like just that check-in, right? Or even asking, what about this situation is within my control and what is not? And we know that. We all know that we have to figure that out. Well, why would I waste time, focused on something that isn't within my control? Well, if you walk into most offices and the water cooler conversation in the lunchroom, somebody's complaining about somebody who's done something that isn't, the way it should be done, and getting all caught up in that vortex of stress. And all of that judgment, all of that time is wasted time, because you can't change how they're going to react. You can only control your reaction to it. So even just that can shift how you show up in a situation.
Right. And you've touched on different stressors a lot. So I guess you mentioned earlier the day-to-day stress. What are some of the other stresses that we deal with, and what are some strategies to kind of navigate those?
So I believe that actually most stress is unnecessary.
Right.
There are 2 kinds of stress. There's good stress. Now, without some of the good stress, we would all be bored out of our minds, right? Like we need something. But good stress is designed to keep you alive, right? Times of danger, you react, get to safety. It's designed to inspire you, and it's designed to focus you. So when you are in a heightened situation, nothing else matters, right? It's like total tunnel vision. You're like, I'm right in on this. You're not thinking about the fact that you have to get milk on your way home, right? Like that's not on your mind.
Right.
And that's good stress. The focus, inspire, keep you alive. The bad stress is the destructive stress. And that's what we see in the news. We see in the reports that is literally killing people. And I believe it is caused by taking obstacles, which are just challenges that we face. And in our work, we're generally paid to solve them. That's our world. And we take those obstacles that are just things that have to be dealt with, and we add negative storylines. We add misplaced emotion, and we add bad habits like worry, judgment, blaming, complaining, procrastination. I have a list of about 30 of them. And we add those to the obstacles. So if we looked at it like this, if you imagine you have a problem, somebody's being rude to you, somebody is, something's happening, or maybe you're late for work, whatever, it doesn't matter. It could be anything, like thinking in your own world, what's a challenge that you may have faced today, or, you're facing immediately right now. And if you were to think of that challenge as represented by an ice cube, okay? It's an ice cube.
Okay.
So if we look at this, all we have to do to solve the problem, we've got to melt the ice cube. But instead what we do is we don't just look at the ice cube. We add that emotion. So it's like taking the ice cube and putting it in a snowbank and packing it with packing snow. And the snow represents misplaced emotion. I'm scared about my own health. I'm scared about my mom who's got, a diagnosis that is a 90% mortality rate. I'm scared about that. And so now I'm taking it out instead of processing that effectively. I'm taking it out on this thing that is just an obstacle in front of me.
Right.
Or I'm traumatized by an experience of something and I didn't know how to process that. And now somebody's just, given me the stink eye, and I'm actually adding emotion to that and thinking it has anything to do with me when they weren't even looking at me. They were, just looking off at the artwork on the wall. So that's some of the snow that's packed around this obstacle. Then we add negative storyline. Oh my gosh, we're never going to get this done. This is like, there's just too much work, or, the government's going to cut all our jobs, or like all these things that we don't even know. Like we know there's stuff, but part of it is just trusting ourselves that we can deal with it when it happens, or I'm going to lose my job because of this, adding all that negative and then adding those bad habits that I talked about. So now all of a sudden you have an ice cube. That was the problem, but we've packed it with so much crap around it that now we got to deal with an entire snowball or sometimes a boulder of snow, when the only thing we really had to deal with was the ice cube. And so my goal with this daily resilience is really about boiling everything down to what is the actual issue. What is the ice cube? And recognizing and being self-aware, what negative story am I adding to this that is not necessarily factual. It's just an event. And, here's the thing. Most of what we see is just our perception of it.
Right.
So we can choose if we want to have the perception. If you look for the good, you're going to find the good. If you look for the bad, you will see it everywhere. And, somebody said to me the other day, they were joking. They're like, you've lived a really sheltered life, which is not true, by the way. But, you always see the good in things. It's because you haven't been exposed to enough bad. I'm like, actually, I've been exposed to more bad than I wish I had have been. But here's the thing. I didn't see it as bad. So even when like looking back now, I mean, not at the time because I didn't have these tools, but I was looking at my surgery now as the biggest blessing that ever happened. Like, my life would never be where it is. I never would have been forced to learn and become self-aware. I never would have had to, really dig deep and interrupt patterns that were not creating a life that I loved, right? Like I didn't know how to say no before the surgery. I was working 18-hour days, mostly volunteering, and just because I thought I had to. And it was great and fine, but it was completely unsustainable. And so by having this significant thing that came in and interrupted my life, I went from working 18-hour days and, out networking. The year before my surgery, I went to 241 networking events.
Wow.
In addition to writing 4 columns a week, in addition to running an eating disorder center. And I thought that was okay. You don't get to do that for 10 years in a row and still be okay, right?
Yeah.
So the surgery interrupted that pattern, and I went from having all that time and all that energy to having 2 to 5 hours of functionality a day. Like, if you don't learn how to have good habits, like saying no, setting boundaries with people, the universe will step in and teach you how to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny you mentioned that. It makes me think of the Steve Jobs quote, where he's just talking about how some things don't make sense when they're happening, but then when you look backwards, you can kind of connect the dots and see how everything fits together. Interesting. So, what are some of the consequences? You touched on this a little bit, but consequences if we fail to develop these skills in resilience, and we're not able to address these challenges over time.
The biggest consequence, I believe, is regret. Now, I say that because from that, the way stress works, destructive stress, is it will make you feel overwhelmed. It will keep you gasping for air. It's like you're drowning just to get that little bit of air left because you're so close to burnout. And, you look fine on the outside and everybody's like, hey, this is, great. And you've got it going out. But inside, you know what you're feeling like. You're drowning. And you're like, you know what? If they just cut off the air a little bit, I'm screwed. Right? Like that feeling. So when you're in that state of destructive stress, you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling anxious, anxiety attacks, cloudy in your head. Well, you can't live your fullest life like that. So destructive stress loses our productivity. It definitely robs our quality of life. And when we're so stressed out at work and we're not able to process it effectively, we get home, and who do we take it out on?
Exactly, yeah. The people who really don't deserve it, right?
Right.
Our loved ones.
The ones we choose to have in our lives.
Yeah,
the rest
exactly.
of the people who we're being good for, we're just working with them, right? Or we're at least trying to. And, that's where the regret comes in. The regret comes in because we don't live our fullest life every day. And not that every day needs to be great. Like, I'm a huge fan of the Netflix marathon and, just have those days where you do nothing. We need those as well.
Yep.
As a whole, at the macro level, we don't want to look back on our life and go, you know what? I was so busy. Busy is the big word, that I didn't actually enjoy it. So if you're, coaching your kids' basketball team and you're worried about what's happening at work or distracted by something that happened to you today, well, then you didn't really get to enjoy the thing that you were choosing to do that you were going to love and enjoy.
Right.
And that's where the regret comes in. And I think that's the risk of stress, destructive stress.
Okay. Now, I guess just thinking in terms of being in that situation, if somebody's listening and they're in that kind of rut where they're in that stress, what's the first step? What's the first piece of advice that you offer them to make the steps towards getting out of there and being resilient?
The first thing I would say is they need to believe that it doesn't actually have to be this way. Because if we don't start at that point, well, we got nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And if, you look, that can be hard. So so that's the first thing. We got to have some level of belief that there is an alternative way. The next thing I would do is I would actually write out an entire list of everything in your life that is stressing you out. It could be a long list. It could be a longer list yesterday than it is tomorrow. It'll ebb and flow. If you write out and become situationally aware of what it is. Now I want you to take that list and I want you to boil it down into the ice cube. For example, you might say, I have, you don't write this if you're sitting beside them. You may say, I have annoying coworkers who don't know what they're doing. So sometimes I go into Teams and I hear things like this. So if somebody out there is thinking that, that's okay. Most people are thinking it. And if they're not thinking of it, maybe they're the person who they think. Anyway, I digress. Instead, boil that down to, I have coworkers. Strip away all the adjectives, strip away all the negative storylines, strip it all away. Now, take that list and I'd like you to go through it and I'd like you to decide, is it a stress? Is it an obstacle? Or is it an adversity? And let me walk you through the difference of them.
All right, perfect.
If we were actually, the greatest way to do this is pretend we're going on a walk. If we were going on a walk and we said, I want to go on a 5-kilometer run, and at the end of it is a finish line and my friends are going to be there to cheer me on. Good stress is setting out on your run, having the goal to go now 5 kilometers and, pushing yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone. You get there, you get done. You're like, wow, I did that. That's great. That's good stress. Bad stress is we start running on that walk and all of a sudden you get distracted and you start saying, ooh, those are some pebbles. Why did I put them in my shoes? And keep running. And while I'm at it, oh, I like those little rocks over there. Why did I pick those up and I'll carry those? And then you have a backpack that you start throwing, more pebbles and more stones and rocks in it. And you get to the end of the finish line and you lie down at the finish line and you go, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe the day that was. That was awful. It was so hard. And you're like, well, actually, you're the one who chose to put the pebbles in your shoes. It didn't need to be that hard. So that's stress. So the difference between good stress, bad stress. Now, obstacles. We're on the same path. We're running along, and all of a sudden there's a log on the path. Now, the path still exists. We just got to figure out, are we going to go over the log, under the log, around the log, blow the log up, move it out of the way? We don't sit on the log and go, oh, log, where were you? Where were you before you were here in my way on a path? Let me talk to you and tell you a story. Oh, were you up there in the sky where you fell from? And stop the run. But that's what people are doing with obstacles. Instead of just going, oh, there's something there that I got to deal with. They're hugging it and they're sitting on it and they're obsessing about this log and telling negative stories and adding emotion to it and putting their bad habits and running on the path and then still going, oh, I wonder how that log is, like worrying about it when it doesn't matter. You just had to get over the log. That's an obstacle. Adversity is very different. Adversity, you're running on your 5-kilometer walk. All of a sudden there's an earthquake and now there's a sinkhole in front of you. The path you were on no longer exists. It's a catastrophic external force that will forever change the way you see your life to be. Anytime we spend trying to get back to how it was, which is why I hate the phrase bounce back. because people use it all the time when they're talking about resilience. I'm going to bounce back. You know what? What was no longer exists. If you've seen something, if you have experienced something, especially people in the situations, where they're in high intensity first responder situations where they are seeing some of the lowest moments of people's lives, true adversities, and then going, oh, no big deal, I'll bounce back. No, who you are is different now that you've actually seen this. And so when you're going in an adversity as a sinkhole, that path you were on no longer exists. Which is why I don't believe resilience is the same. So the fundamental of it is the same. Got to have the situational awareness, the self-awareness, and the solution activation. But the solution activation will be completely different, because it does not matter how resilient you are. If you face a true adversity in your life, you have to go through the human instinct of getting through it. You have to heal. The focus needs to be not on how do I power through this adversity. You can't power through because the sinkhole is there. There's no path for you to power through on. What you need to do is you need to look at, okay, what's happening? What about this situation is within my control? Okay, all of the stuff around me, how I approach my work, how I approach obstacles, that I can control, but I have to heal. I have to grieve. I have to deal with this adversity. And our focus needs to be on mitigating all the stuff around us that's, eating up our days, effectively doing that. That's what daily resilience does. And then focusing on healing and going through the grieving process. Doesn't matter how resilient, there's no way to escape it. As a human, you're going to be forced through it. May not be pretty, but it's got to happen. Obstacles, very different. Obstacles, we want to see them, want to boil them down to their absolute, down to that ice cube that I was talking about. And we want to get very creative and solution focused faster. So, okay, how do I deal with this? How do I get over it? How do I melt it? How do I blow it up? How do I get it out of the way? Do I need to deal with it? Do I go around it, under it? What do I need to do with this obstacle? And then people need to activate a solution, because knowing what to do and not actually doing it is not knowing what to do. Right?
Right.
So that is the next step. But see, when it's adversity, the solution activation is, and some of your listeners might roll their eyes at this moment, but in many ways is like self-care and getting help and, figuring out and trying to reimagine a new path. Like if you lose somebody who you love, right? Like all the time I spent in the world trying to get my dad back, he was never coming back.
Yeah.
Right? So I have to get okay with the fact that I've lost him and move forward. And people say time heals all wounds. Time just makes it easier to deal with the suckage.
Right.
Right? You just kind of get used to it. And eventually you build a new bridge to get over that sinkhole and find a new path. But obstacles, let's get so focused on, as soon as something happens. I remember I was going through construction on a renovation, the house I grew up in, and it had turned into quite an experience. And I got a phone call one day that we had been robbed. Now, nobody was hurt. Nobody was at home. The place was in a construction mode, a renovation mode. And so all the tools were gone, all the materials were gone, and a little bit of damage, but nothing major. And I get the call on a Tuesday morning. And I've got a full work day. And the place is an hour and 20 minutes away. So now most of the time, and when I've talked with other people who have had that unfortunate situation happen, the drama begins. Oh my gosh, I've been robbed. And, call everybody and, go into work and tell the dramatic story. Now, gratefully, I am a business owner, so I can be on the road when I'm working. So instead of that, I went, check in, self-awareness. What's the situation situational awareness first. What's the situation I'm dealing with? I've been robbed. Nobody was hurt. It's just stuff. Got to deal with this. What things need to happen? What's within? Is this a stress, an obstacle, and adversity? It's not an adversity unless I was emotionally attached to the materials, which I mean really sucks because you got to rebuy them. But I knew I had insurance if I needed it, right? It's just an obstacle. And it will become a destructive stress if I add misplaced emotion, dramatic negative storylines, or bad habits like worrying about it or procrastinating about dealing with it or anything like that. So instead I went, okay, what needs to happen? First thing, I did all my check-in self-awareness. How am I feeling right now? Okay, well, I'm a little bit tired. My pain's a little high, but I can still, okay, that puts me at risk, right? Mental game. What is my mental game? What am I saying about this? Okay, you know what? I can talk myself off the ledge here. It's not that big a deal, right? And emotionally, how am I feeling? I feel a little violated, feel a little scared about, wait, hey, how could we get robbed in a little village? This means there's something going on there. So I recognize that. And I said, okay, I'm going to make a note that when we move in, I need security systems. Okay, so I could park that now. So now I've got a clear mind. I've cleared up the snowball, and it's about solution activation. What are the things that need to happen? Focus on it. Boom, 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 boom. And I did. I called the police, said, okay, when can I meet you there? Okay. So we had our little window. I'm like, great, I can get there by then. I called the people who I was supposed to meet in person that day. And I said, hey, would you mind if we did a phone call conversation instead? No problem. And I just lined up my day. And when I was on the highway with everything ready and in place, that's when I made a phone call. That's when I called my mom and said, hey, by the way, something happened down at the house. I'm going down there. All is taken care of. So that kind of a situation, a few weeks later, I was in with a small team, and we were talking about it. And one of the gals there kind of told that story, and it had just happened, so it was really fresh, and it wasn't really a story that I normally had told. And she was just like, she couldn't understand. She's like, listen, we got robbed. And she said, my life for 3 weeks became about the drama of the robbery. And she said, I didn't even know I could have just handled it without the snow around the ice cube. And so here's the thing. That's just an example of processing something that could feel like an adversity. Now, if somebody had been hurt, obviously it's a very different story, right?
Right.
We can spend so much of our lives sucking away our capacity to do the things that matter, like show up at work at our best, perform at our best, show up for our family at our best. And we suck it for the stuff that doesn't deserve our attention. And that's my hope for people. Stop giving the stuff that doesn't matter your attention, and stop diminishing the stuff that really does matter. And the people who are involved and see, so, your security guards who are at the hospital, the first responders out in, an accident, or I don't even know how you guys do it. And I'm not going to claim to have an answer, but I will say this. Those are true adversities that you're witnessing, not your adversities, but your adversity becomes the PTSD or the hidden emotion that you're not willing to process or feel. And that will eat away at you. And it will show up in other areas of your life that don't deserve to have that. And, we have to look at that. Like, you're in such and it's not comparison, by the way, because everybody's reality is different. Everybody's perspective is different. So for someone going to their job that is safe, but they have a really long to-do list and they can't keep up with their work, is their version of what's stressful. Whereas somebody else, their version of what's stressful is going to a situation where somebody ends up losing their life. And we can't compare the two because our perception and our reaction of stress and what is destructive stress is actually the same thing. The stimulus is not, it has different varying degrees, but in truth, a lot of our obstacles that we face are actually not innately stressful on their own. Our reaction to them is what causes the stress. But when you're hammered day in, day out, looking at other people's adversity and witnessing that, then for you, that means that how you process all the other crap in your life, how you deal with your coworkers, how you deal with the fact that you're in a traffic jam, how do you deal with the fact that you spilt coffee on your, outfit and you have to go change, like whatever it is, all the small things that are the little ice cubes. You don't have the luxury, because you have to do so much self-awareness and because you have to do so much situational processing and solution activation, which could in that case be dealing with your emotions, processing that. And because you need so much intensity and resource for the real stuff, if you allow the day-to-day to become you spinning in the vortex of stress and getting caught up in the misplaced emotion, the negative storylines, and the bad habit, you are putting yourself behind you're eating up your capacity and sucking your capacity from being able to deal with the real stuff completely unnecessarily and out of habit.
All right. Well, you talk about something as well called, the resiliency set point, and we all have a set point, kind of, a default for us. Can you kind of walk us through that resiliency set point and help us just kind of understand our own natural tendencies?
Right. So we all have a natural way that we're going to respond to challenges. And I do this a lot in my keynotes for leadership, because they not only have to understand how they respond, they need to understand how their team is responding. So even if you see it in coworkers, because it can, in your colleague circle, it's really important, because if you don't understand this, you might get really frustrated without how other people respond to challenge. So the first one, that is essentially the opposite of resilience, is the victim. Everyone else is to blame. Absolutely zero personal responsibility. You'll hear them say things like, when I win the lottery, I'll be happy. When things slow down, then I'll be good coming to work. You recognize this person because they are complaining about a change that was made 2 years ago. So we all know somebody in our mind, and no judgment, but it's important to understand this. And also to recognize if it's in yourself. If you're in that victim mode, you might complain about your circumstances more than you're willing to do something about them. And the challenge with victimhood is you will feel a lack of control in your life. You will feel that everyone is doing it to you. And when your mood is dictated by external circumstances, you will never feel fully fulfilled. So that's the victim. By the way, the hardest one to move to resilience. Except I've had stories of people who have heard this work and done, some more in depth than we're going into here. And a week later walked into their leader's office and said, so I realized that I complained too much, and I think I may be the problem with our team dynamics, and I'm going to commit to showing up better. And it's that simple, recognizing it. And if I I can digress just for a second from the set point, because this is really important. When we try to change our reactions set point, if we have a tendency, so self-awareness, if we have a tendency to worry, or we have a tendency to complain or to judge people and be condescending, you may never, if been on this earth for a couple of decades or more, you may never change that first initial reaction. What I want to challenge you to do is recognize it's happening, and you have full control over your second reaction. So I was talking to a coaching client today, and he, when we first started working together, he was a worrier. So he couldn't relax. When he got home for dinner, at dinner, he was thinking about work. At work, he was thinking about his family, right? Like it was just like he couldn't escape worry. And this Christmas time, I talked to him in between New Year's and Christmas. And I said, "How are you?" He said, "I'm not worried at all." He's like, "I don't even understand. I don't worry anymore." So he can break the habit. But even since then, we'll have a conversation. He's like, "I started to worry about it." He said, "But I caught myself. And then I went back to, what are the facts? What can I trust myself to deal with it later?" Like all the things I have on, how to stop worrying. And so I think that that's really important, because we try to make changes in our life and then we judge ourselves, another bad habit, right? For not changing the habit. Like, oh, I just complained, so now all of a sudden I'm going to give up on my goal to stop complaining. Well, no. You complained, you recognized it, which is the first step. Now we can choose the second choice, which is to not complain, or to shift what we were thinking about it, or to say something positive to counteract the negative. So I think that that's really important, because that first response is different, or may always be instinctual. Okay, so now back to the set point. We've got the victim. The second one is you numb out. You're an avoider. You're going to avoid it. So by the way, my natural set point dial. So I, if there's something going on, I don't want to deal with it, I just shut down. You'll recognize these people because they will say things like, whatever, it is what it is. They'll avoid the tough conversations. So maybe you show up sick on the day when you're supposed to get your annual review, right? The challenge with this is you will go through the motions of life without the emotions of life. And that's not how we're built. That's not how it's supposed to be. And the thing with emotions is we will feel joy in direct relation to our ability to feel despair. We need both. I used to think that happiness was the default. And if I wasn't happy every day, then something was wrong with me. Judgment, bad habit. The truth is, neutral is our default. And we ebb and flow from there, up, down, all around. So that numbing out, still, first instinct for me, problem happens, I want to shut down. And then I go, oh, look at me shutting down. Is this something I need to deal with? What's the situation? Is it a stress? Is it an obstacle? Is it an adversity? And then I keep going through that. And then solution activation. What do I need to deal with and make it happen? And I don't do it perfectly all the time. I tell you, I am a work in progress. And, in this journey with other people to how do we love our lives just a little bit more without the stress, a better, less stressful way. So numbing out. The next one is the very reactive person. And I think that this is where a lot of people live, right? Something is going right, I'm in a great mood. Something goes wrong, I'm in a bad mood. And the challenge with this is you will spend your life consistently with your mood controlled by everything and everyone else. And that's not how it's supposed to be. And then we move to resilience mastery. And what that's about is, you know what? There's an obstacle over there. I'm facing a challenge. I trust myself to deal with this. I'm going to focus on the ice cube. I'm going to melt the ice cube. I'm not going to do all the drama around and make it a great big snow boulder. And I'm going to, have my mood dictated by my mood, not by the outside external circumstances. It's a very cool place to be. To trust yourself to be able to deal with the worst, the true adversities. Because I think sometimes we talk about, resilience, and people have this thinking that they're going to be insulated from the real stuff in life. And they're not. There's no way. You have no choice but to go through grief. There is no level, and I know I said that earlier, but there's no level of resilience that will save you from what happens when you lose somebody you love. Resilience, daily resilience, will help you process the day-to-day better so that you can go through the grief.
Right. Now, one of the things that I was just thinking while you were talking about that is, there's science that shows that we have a certain amount of willpower, a certain amount of capacity for that. Is it the same with resilience? Do we each have our own set capacity?
I think we each have a capacity of intensity per day. Okay. So a lot of times we measure capacity based on time. I don't actually think time is the issue.
Right.
I think it's we suck up our capacity with the misplaced emotions, negative stories, and bad habits, worry, judgment, complaining, blaming, et cetera, and then we have nothing left over. I totally forgot your question.
Is it similar to willpower with resiliency?
Oh, willpower, yeah. So I think what happens is we have nothing left. So yeah, it is sort of the same. I mean, willpower, I think, is a different topic area, and I think it has a different way to do it. But I actually think you can apply the exact same framework to it. Situational awareness. What is it that I'm not willing and having the power to do? Right? Self-awareness. What's my state physically, mentally, emotionally? How am I responding to this? Is this appropriate or not? What is the trigger that is making me not have that willpower? Right? And then the solution activation. How can I remove that trigger so that I will do the thing I want to do? And again, first instinct different than your choice to do second instinct. But I think it's all the same stuff. I think it's all related. And, we need to, as humans, we're driven by growing, right? We have our different human needs and we want to continually improve and get better. And, well, at least I do. Like, hey, if last year was the best year, you hope for more, right? It's hope that keeps us going. And I think sometimes, especially when you see people who have severe mental illness and, or have gone through such traumas and tragedies, and they can't see the hope for the better way. And then people placate them by saying things like, oh, time will heal all wounds. And they're thinking, yeah, but right now I'm so in so much pain. But if you think about that, we are taught not to process our emotions from like being a kid. Like if you were fortunate enough to have a parent or a teacher or somebody who was an adult who loved you, and you fell down off your bike and you skinned your knee, what happened? Somebody came running and, cleaned you all up and maybe took you inside and put some polysporin on it and a Band-Aid and, kissed it all better, like, all good now. Doesn't hurt anymore. And you as a kid are thinking, no, it hurts. But you're told, don't cry. It's fine. It's no big deal. And we tell people don't cry because we're empathetic beings and we don't want to feel the hurt that other person is feeling. And so we diminish it. We're taught not to process our emotions. So we get people into these extreme situations. That instinct needs to carry you through, and you're supposed to go through the ups and downs of life every day on smaller scale. So you get trained to deal with the good, deal with the bad. And then we go through these huge things that completely blindside us and, gut us to our core, and we're not trained. It's literally like going out, running that path, and instead of doing 5K as your first or your second or your 10th, you're running the marathon or the Ironman. Right? And you've never walked.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so we're not dealing with our emotions on a day-to-day and processing effectively and figuring out how do we deal with these obstacles. And then something huge happens and we're lost. No wonder we're lost. Because society has taught us not to deal with the little things effectively.
Right. And I think, and I jump on my soapbox for a minute here.
Yeah,
but
please. I have done a little bit of talking. I mean, I think we're, I am not at a loss for words, obviously. So please, soapbox for us.
No, I just have to agree with you. And I think in recent years, especially, we've done a really poor job of preparing young people for real life. Especially, I'll use the example of sports, just, as being someone who coaches youth. You have these leagues where they don't even keep score. But realistically, the kids know, like, my son will play a soccer game and, they win 5-2, but they weren't keeping score. Everybody, it was a tie. Everybody did well. We're in the car and he's like, yeah, we beat them 5-2. Nobody's keeping score, but the kids know the score, right? So we've done a really bad job, I think, as a society, just preparing people for real life.
So it's interesting because I hear this a lot and I agree. Young people, I'm talking to 70-year-olds who are running companies and they don't have a clue how to process an emotion. Because think about it, like, and even when my grandma was alive, she was like, don't cry.
Yeah.
Keep a stiff upper lip. Right?
Right.
And so we weren't taught on a different scale.
Right.
So there you were allowed to fail, but you weren't allowed to feel bad about it. Right? And now we're not showing them the opportunity to fail. So then when they get into the real world and they fail, right, they're lost. But I think it's across all generations. And, here's the thing. I have probably read 200 books on, behavioral, aspects. I have watched every night some sort of a YouTube video from somebody who is teaching this stuff. I, because of my surgery, ended up with a pain psychologist who I have seen consistently every few weeks for the last 8 years. That has allowed me a unique, I don't want to use the word obsession, but a unique passion and insight into this topic because of all of that. Because I was forced to it because of the pain, because of the surgery, because of all the medications and the procedures and the loss and the 8 major injuries of these different things that were, broken or, just bad luck and wrong time, that whole decade of hell. And I'm still struggling. I still am wondering, why did I just snap at my mom because she was complaining about something, right? Like, Mom, why are you even complaining? Don't you like stop? And this is the human experience. This is, our quest for being better and to allow ourselves to fail and to be okay with that. First instinct, different than second reaction. It's a process. And I think one of the reasons I'm so fired up by it, people can't tell, is I think too many people are just going through the motions of life and not investigating and getting curious about this process. And if they would just start asking the questions. Like, one of my worst habits that I had to overcome was negative self-talk. So I would be in so much pain and couldn't work. And then I would just cut myself up and be like, oh my gosh, you're so lazy. What's wrong with you? Get up, go out and, make a sale and you're going to do this. And all these negative stories and anger towards myself because I couldn't do it. And, I stopped that habit. It took years, by the way. And even now I have to catch myself. First instinct, second response. But I hear people say things about themselves like, oh, I'm such an idiot.
Yep.
But we as a society are like, we don't interrupt them and go, excuse me, you're not an idiot. We just let it roll off their tongue. Like that's okay to say about yourself. You know, if somebody, this is the thing, like if I, love your neighbor as you love yourself, I'm like, oh gosh, if I talk to my neighbors the way I talk about, to myself about myself, my neighbors would move. Right. And yet we are going around in society thinking that this is okay, a way to live. It's not. It's not how we're designed. It's not where you find fulfillment and a less stressful, better way to live. And it can be different. And it's the little things, small tweaks, big results. Next time you say something really crappy about yourself, I'm an idiot, or, I always do that. I always forget that. I always forget things. You know what? Flip it. Say, you know what? Well, I remembered 95% of the things I needed to remember today. Yay! Because that's good. Right? Start celebrating the wins. I had to start saying, because my instinct was, oh, you're so lazy, you're on the couch. And I had to flip it. I'd be like, you know what? You're in a ton of pain right now. And, the medication, I don't take any medication now for my pain at all. But back then, it's not working and you just have to take care of yourself. And this is the right thing to do right now. And, and then I got really focused during the times when I could work. So, saying the bad thing, but then having the self-awareness that you're saying about it yourself and then forcing yourself to counteract it with something good. Try to, do your best to even those out, right? A negative, a positive. Because it's just that little thing. If you just did that, started to notice your word. Everybody has a word. I had a client who was awful was her word. First meeting. She says, an hour, we were together, and she might have said that she was awful at something 40 times. And I said, hey, listen, you know what? I'm having a tough time keeping track. Would you mind terribly just making out a list of everything you're awful at? Because I feel like there's a lot and I need to, and she's like, what do you mean? And I forced her. I said, I don't force her. I mean, everybody's free will, right? That sounds awful. Awful. There's that word. I said, every time you say the word awful for the next 48 hours, I want you to make a little tick mark on your thing. And so for, the rest of the meeting, every time she said it, I had to say, oh, you said awful. And she'd make a tick because she wasn't even realizing she was saying it.
Right.
And then she got curious. She's like, I wonder how often I say it. And then she said it took her a day. And she was like, oh, I say it a lot. Without the curiosity, you would never know you said it a lot. And if you're like, that's the self-awareness. And maybe the very first question somebody says is, how can I be more self-aware?
Right. And now while we're on the topic actually of words, one of the words that you're not a proponent of for sure is the word busy. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, busy. How are you? Good, busy. Hey, we should do lunch. No, we're too busy. We're not getting together. So this word is actually really can hurt relationships. And I know that sounds dramatic, that a single word. Think about it. If you say to somebody, how are you? And they say, I'm busy. Your natural instinct is to rush the conversation because they're busy. I did a keynote for 300 professionals in a room. And I asked the question, I said, who's ever thought that their boss was too busy for them to go to for a legitimate problem? And most of the people raised their hand. So if you have had that happen where somebody who you want to talk to says they're too busy, how are people feeling about you? Do your kids think you're too busy for them to come to you? or do your friends, or do the people who you work with, whoever, whatever it is. But it's just such a default cop out. We're all busy. I mean, that's the issue, right? And the thing is, it never changes. So when we continually say, oh, I'm busy and I'm overwhelmed and I'm stressed and I've got so much to do, our brain and our physiology reacts as if we're stressed, busy, overwhelmed, and have too much to do. You get what you ask for. And so all we're doing when we're using the word busy is reinforcing. And it's like taking an ice cube, which is all the things you need to do, and adding negative storyline around it and glorifying busy. People would be actually a lot busier if they spent more time doing the things they had to do and less time, complaining and dramatizing the fact that they have to do it. I was with somebody yesterday over lunch, and she said, she's complaining about the new regulations and everything that she has to get done. And, it's so overwhelming, and it's just like weighing her down. And, she went into it, and there's a difference between letting somebody vent, which is really important because we need that to process, and then letting somebody get into the weeds and not deal with the problem. So there came a point. And I said, so I'm curious, like, if you were to look at your list and all these things that need to happen, how much time is this going to take from you? Right. And I'm thinking, 25 hours a week, something like that. She's like, well, I think probably about 30 minutes. And I'm like, oh, she said, I think I'm just more upset that I think it's a stupid regulation. And I'm like, you think? And how long has she spent keeping it on a list, not ever doing it? And,
Right.
and that's the thing. It's an ice cube. Just deal with it. How long would it actually take you to do it? Like, could you break it down into 10-minute stints and just get her done? It's so funny. So most of us, we're all busy. And I think what makes people feel overwhelmed by the busy is the intensity of the negativity around the busyness.
All right. So since busy obviously isn't a word that we want to be using, what are some more empowering words that we could use in its place?
I'm strategically filling my calendar. I am opting to use my time in a way that makes me feel awesome. Or I'm doing my job.
Yeah, that works.
There are so many different ways. I think we as humans are so much more interesting than the fact that we have stuff to do.
Right.
What are you busy doing? You know what? I am so excited because tonight's the night I'm going to coach my son's basketball team, like you, right? Like is it your son's team that you coach?
Yes.
Yes. So that, right? That is more interesting than I'm busy. Or, you know what? I'm feeling really overwhelmed. If it's somebody who you trust. Because the overwhelmed we can deal with. Stressed and busy is a cop-out. We can't deal with it.
Yeah.
Because you're always going to be busy. And, as I talk to people out in the world, and it doesn't matter what industry they're in, what type of workplace they're in, across the board, there is an expectation to do more, too much, with too few resources and too little time. And that's intensifying. It's not getting better. So hanging your hat on busy and thinking that that's shocking, like people say it like, whoa, I'm busy. Oh, wow. I'm impressed. So I'm not, because we all are. So finding something that's really important to you to share and saying something a little bit deeper. Most people hate small talk because we say things like, I'm good, I'm busy. No, offer a little more depth. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm working on this project, or I got a new uniform today, or, hey, I got these new kicks, like whatever. It doesn't matter. Just offer something that's a little bit more relevant to your life. And if you're less caught up in the vortex of stress, you might actually have a little bit more enjoyment and presence of life. And with that, you might actually have something more exciting to say than you're busy. Yeah.
Awesome. Now, what are you up to these days in terms of speaking engagements, projects, and just other things that you're working on?
You know what? I've got a new book coming out soon. It is called Take Back Your Weekends, a better, less stressful way to do all you do. So that is sort of encapsulates a lot of this information. That will come out. I have a new podcast starting. I think it's going to be the same title. We'll see. And the speaking is what I love to do. Like, I love going to conferences and getting to share some of these concepts with audiences, and whether it's a nurses conference or whether it's a bankers conference, it doesn't matter, because it's all the same human experience. And that's really what I'm focused on is those keynotes. And then complementing that is like small team workshops where we can actually dive into some of this and really look at, how do we just lower, because if we can just lower the stress levels 10%, how much better would work be? If we could just get to solution focus mode 20% faster, how many more challenges could we solve and make space for solving or dealing with and processing the real ones? That's cool. That's what I want. Yeah. So looking for more speaking engagements. I've got, amazing clients, so happy and blessed, and I want to do more. I want to be on the road. And so if people are planning conferences or know somebody who is, or, maybe your wife or your husband is involved in another organization too, that, mention my name, please.
Absolutely. Now, in closing, do you have any last advice to offer to the listeners?
Get curious. What if it could be different? If you are not right now feeling fulfilled in your life and feeling like you're okay with the control level you have and your emotional reality, get curious, because it can be different. And if you don't start asking different questions of yourself, the last 5 years are the best indicator of what the next 5 years will be. And if you're okay with that, if you're okay with duplicating what the last 5 years was, ignore everything I have said in the last, 4 hours that we've been talking. Not quite that long. Ignore it all. If, however, you want it to be different, self-awareness, get curious. Why am I taking that ice cube and turning it into a snowball? Just makes everything harder. Stop making life harder. You don't need to make life harder. Actually, life can be very much in flow. Get curious.
All right. Now, you're pretty active on social media as well. For anybody who wants to connect with you, how do you recommend they do so?
Oh, my favorite is LinkedIn.
Same.
It is. It's so good. But that's how we met.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
There you go. Proof is in the pudding right here. I love LinkedIn, and I'm on Twitter. My website is allisongraham.co. If anybody knows the father who is sitting on the unused website, allisongraham.com, please, by all means, give it to me. But anyway, no, but it's .co, and all the social medias, we're out there, but LinkedIn is really where I spend most of my time.
Excellent. Well, thank you for doing this. I appreciate your time, and there's a lot of value in this conversation. So
awesome. I loved
thanks.
having the conversation. Thank you for this, and thank you for doing what you're doing, because I think you're bringing a lot of value to the people who you serve, and that's really running a podcast and bringing these interviews and arranging them and driving down here on the highway when you could be with your family, that's awesome.
Well, thank you for that. And this concludes another episode of the Healthcare Security Cast. Join us next week when we have a new guest and a new topic. In the meantime, feel free to engage with us. You can connect with me directly on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also become a member of our LinkedIn group page, the Healthcare Security Cast community, or you can join our Facebook page as well. Thank you, and until next time, take care.